It's sounding more and more like Mohammad Deif was killed in an Israeli airstrike a little over a week ago. Now, Deif is kind of the number 2 Hamas leader in the Gaza Strip. He runs the Gazan brigade, so the militant arm of the organization. And if killed, he would be the senior-most Hamas figure eliminated since October 7th. Now, I want to note that at this point, we don't have 100% confirmation either way. Hamas has not shown proof of life, and Israel has not shown confirmation that Deif was actually killed, but there's some indicators that we'll get into here in a second. Now, Israel released additional information about this strike, saying that it was carried out in several stages. In the first stage, they say the Air Force targeted the section of a building in the compound where the senior Hamas leader was staying. Then a missile was fired and destroyed the entire building. The third strike sealed a ring of fire around the entire area to prevent forces from reaching and assisting him. The fourth part involved a bunker-busting missile that struck underground. That's a very complex strike for one person, and the kind of thing that you would really reserve for a senior, high-value target like Mohammad Deif. Of course, Israel from the get-go said that he was the target of this strike. It wasn't, by happenstance that he was there. They were going after him specifically. Now, the IDF Arabic spokesperson put out a note yesterday saying, quote, "In the past 2 days, the signs indicating the success of the operation to eliminate Mohammad Deif have increased. But as of now, there is no 100% official confirmation. Israel relies on intelligence information in this complex and special operation, and the Air Force launched the bombs and missiles to the location after confirming that Khan Yunis Brigade Commander Rafa was sitting next to Mohammad Deif." Now, in terms of kind of the indicators that I was mentioning a second ago, that we really have to read between the lines here, because it's not in Hamas's best interest to put out that one of their senior leaders was killed, and it's going to be very hard for Israel to gather that intelligence on the ground in an area they don't control, that is Khan Yunis, right? So a couple things to keep in mind here. This is the first time that Israel has put out since October 7th that they were deliberately targeting Mohammad Deif and saying that they actually killed him, or they believe they killed him. If there was no evidence to support that, they could have just said this at any point. We're going on 10 months of this fighting. If they were just going to say it and make Hamas deal with the aftermath of not wanting to prove that Deif was alive, they could have said this in mid to late October, November, or February, anytime. So for some reason, right now, Israel is more confident than ever throughout this war to put out publicly that they successfully targeted and killed Mohammad Deif. The second piece has to do with proof of life. Now, I want to be clear that Hamas providing proof of life for any of their members is not normal. That is not standard operating procedure for the organization for a lot of reasons. So the fact that it's not coming out isn't really out of the ordinary. But this strike also isn't really ordinary, right? We're talking about the senior military commander of Hamas in Gaza. It would be very surprising to see a picture or a video released by Mohammad Deif. Wouldn't hold out hope for that at all. But an audio recording talking about the strike that could be passed through multiple channels to kind of mask where it actually came from seems like an easy layup for Hamas to put out there to kind of dispel and discredit what Israel is saying about this strike. The only thing we have at this point is in the immediate aftermath, like minutes after the strike took place, Hamas spokespeople in Qatar, I believe it was, put out a statement saying Deif is alive and laughing at you right now. Nothing since then at all. So again, it does look more and more like he may have actually been killed in this targeted strike. Now, just a couple days ago, Israel kicked off a new offensive operation in Khan Yunis. This is kind of the new phase of the war as Israel's conducting it. We saw large movements. We're going to pull up a map here to give you an idea of what we're talking about. The start of the war, zooming into Gaza here in the southwest portion of Israel. The start of the war saw kind of large military formations clearing generally north to south. What we're seeing more and more now are targeted raids, kind of larger scale raids with a couple thousand Israeli soldiers. And right now they're focused on Khan Yunis. They say they went into Khan Yunis following intelligence of Hamas operatives and infrastructure in the area. So Khan Yunis here in kind of the more southern portion of the Gaza Strip. For reference, Rafa is down here at the bottom of the screen. And a lot of the fighting in recent days has actually been up here in the northern portion of the strip. So according to the IDF, Hamas has been attempting to regroup in Khan Yunis. The IDF says that aircraft and artillery struck some 30 sites belonging to Hamas in Khan Yunis yesterday as this offensive began, including a rocket launch site used in an attack on southern Israel, weapons depots, observation posts, tunnel shafts, and buildings used by Hamas. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, they say around 70 Palestinians were killed in that initial wave of strikes against Khan Yunis yesterday. Then earlier, or yesterday as well, the IDF actually put out a statement, put out this graphic, calling on Palestinians to evacuate the eastern portions of Khan Yunis and some other areas of this designated humanitarian zone following repeated rocket attacks on southern Israel. So this is also the general area where the strike was carried out against Salameh and Deif. There were Hamas militants there, according to Israel. So it looks like they're moving in to try to clear out that area once more. And in the last few days, have seen quite a few rocket attacks from what was labeled a humanitarian zone. Then moving to today, the second day of the Khan Yunis operation, Israel said they hit 50 more Hamas targets across Khan Yunis as the 98th Division began movement into the city. Then turning down to Rafa, pulling the map back up here to give you an idea, the offensive taking place here in Khan Yunis. And we're shifting down to Rafa for a little bit more here. This is the portion along the border with Egypt. Israel released this footage here showing what they say are armed gunmen climbing onto trucks carrying humanitarian aid into Rafa in the southern portion of the Gaza Strip. They say that these Hamas operatives frequently try to hijack aid deliveries, especially ones moving along these designated humanitarian aid routes. Additionally, in the past week, Israel said that they raided a school next to one of these humanitarian routes where a group of Hamas gunmen were holed up, they believe, planning to take control of the route where some of these aid trucks passed through. Additionally, Israel says they identified a Hamas rocket launch location in central Gaza's Maghazi yesterday, which they say the rocket fired and fell short inside of the Gaza Strip, including one projectile that struck a school in Nusrat. Rockets falling short, fired by Hamas inside of Gaza, is nothing new. There have been hundreds of those since the opening days of the war. Look, the rockets are makeshift. Some of them manufactured inside of Gaza. They're going to malfunction. They're going to fly off course. And it sounds like yesterday was just the most recent of those. It's almost an everyday occurrence that a Hamas rocket falls inside of the Gaza Strip. Now, if you've not heard of a gentleman I've cited before on this channel, he's worth checking out, especially on X, Ahmed Faoud al-Khatib. I'm always nervous I'm mispronouncing that, but he's a Palestinian-American, very much supports the Palestinian people, but has been pushing back against Hamas forever. And he put out an interesting statement that I thought was worth reading on X just yesterday, where he said, "Listen to the people of Gaza and what they're saying. Read Arabic or find someone who can understand this. They're cursing out the terrorists, firing mortars and rockets among them and causing their mass displacement and suffering in Khan Yunis and elsewhere today. This is not resistance. It's suicidal, evil madness that's deliberately baiting the Israeli military into attacking and causing massive displacement, death, and destruction. If you're still chanting for Hamas or the armed resistance narrative, this is what you're supporting. The people of Gaza hate you and despise morons who don't experience the consequences of guerrilla warfare and urban combat that's exceptionally deadly to civilians, particularly when conducted by ruthless death cults." It's very, very hard to get actual sentiment out of Gaza when Hamas still is kind of the governing entity in a lot of ways. It's either Hamas or in some areas Israel has control. But when you are able to follow some of these folks that, again, support the Palestinian people and want to see the best for the Palestinian people, more and more we're seeing them speak out and kind of bash Hamas and say this is not helping. What Hamas is doing is killing more Palestinians. They're not actually advancing any sort of cause. Now, a note from inside of the Israeli government yesterday that I felt like was worth bringing up here. We try to kind of stay away from Israeli domestic politics, but every so often it has to come up given the nature of what we're discussing here. On Monday, the Israeli parliament gave preliminary approval on a bill that declares the main United Nations relief organization for Palestinians a terrorist organization and proposes to sever relations with the body. So this is talking about UNRWA or UNRWA. That stands for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. According to this report in Reuters, they say they provide education, health, and aid to millions of Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, and has long had tense relations with Israel, but relations have deteriorated sharply since the start of the war in Gaza, and Israel has repeatedly called on the UNRWA to be disbanded. There's been multiple events since October 7th, most of which we covered on this channel here, where UNRWA has at the very least been alongside Hamas events. There were some investigations into UNRWA workers or contractors to a degree taking part in the October 7th attack. it was mixed from what I recall. Some was just facilitating movement across the border, but either way, involved to a degree. We saw a UNRWA building with the headquarters in Gaza, with significant underground infrastructure being used by Hamas, to the point so much power being siphoned off to where there is no way they didn't know that something was happening below ground. So UNRWA has been at the heart of a lot of controversy during the war in Gaza, and it looks like just this week, Israel has moved to essentially expel them from the country and sever all ties. Now, another legal aspect here, the International Court of Justice just this past week said it determined Israel's policy of settlement in the West Bank violates international law, and that Israel has effectively annexed large parts of the West Bank due to some of their apparently permanent aspects of Israeli rule there. The ICJ ruled that Israel must end its control of these areas, cease new settlement activity, repeal all legislation and measures creating or maintaining the unlawful situation, including those which it said discriminate against the Palestinian people in the occupied Palestinian territory, and provide reparations for any damage caused by its, quote, wrongful acts. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded by saying, quote, the Jewish people are not occupiers in their own land, not in our eternal capital Jerusalem, not in the land of our ancestors in Judea and Samaria. No false designation in The Hague will distort this historical truth, just as the legality of Israeli settlement in the territories of our homeland cannot be contested. Hamas, of course, was in favor of this ICJ ruling, putting out a statement saying, quote, we in the Islamic Resistance Movement, which is Hamas, welcome the legal opinion issued by the International Court of Justice in which it affirmed the illegality of the Zionist occupation and the necessity of putting an end to it, and to which it exposed the fascist settlement system, demanded its end, and pointed out the widespread violations of international law committed by the different occupation governments against our people and our Palestinian land. So the West Bank, by and large, hasn't gotten a lot of international attention since October 7th. Again, moving to the map here, the West Bank has been far from safe and secure for a long time, but since the war began, because it emanated from Gaza down here in the southern portion of the Strip, and that's where the IDF largely kicked off all operations, this has been the focus. Gaza has been the focus, the ins and outs of the Gaza Strip. But the West Bank, this portion here in the eastern portion of Israel in light blue on this map, has not been peaceful. There's been regular drone strikes. We're going to get into one here in a second. Individual attacks, ramming attacks, stabbings, shootings, and the IDF conducting pretty consistent raids all across the West Bank. And now, with the help of the ICJ, it seems like the West Bank is going to be more in the discussion. Now, continuing with the West Bank, yesterday, Hamas put out a statement saying that there was a series of operations carried out by the Al-Qassam Mujahideen in the Tulkarm government in the West Bank, which resulted in casualties among the enemy's ranks. So again, to give you an idea of the area we're going to be talking about here, let's see, Tulkarm is just, there we go. So to be clear, what I just mentioned was Hamas saying that their fighters in the West Bank carried out operations. For some reason, there's been some confusion about whether or not Hamas exists in the West Bank. They have for a long time. That's nothing new. They've been claiming attacks in the West Bank since before October 7th, and quite a few since October 7th. So again, just yesterday, Hamas saying they are active and attacking Israeli forces in the West Bank. In response to this, Israel carried out a series of airstrikes, and according to Palestinian media, 5 people were killed in this drone strike, including 2 senior operatives. The reports of the dead include Ashraf Nafeh, the commander of Hamas in the Tulkarm camp, and Mohammed Abu Abdo, the commander of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade in the same area. Those are senior leaders, very senior leaders. Now, just like if Mohammad Deif were killed, it doesn't mean that the organization is going to end, but it can cause some disruption across the entity. So it's worth noting that Israel was able to identify, strike, and apparently kill 2 senior leaders inside of the West Bank. They added that the IDF assesses that the drone strike in the West Bank killed at least 6 gunmen, including 2 senior terror commanders. Among those killed was a female gunman who was dressed up as a medic. So again, West Bank's not been getting a lot of attention since October 7th, understandably so, but this is an area where Hamas and other militant groups have been operating for a long time. So it wouldn't be shocking, as we see to a degree operations kind of wind down in Gaza, to see maybe an uptick of Israeli offensive actions against Hamas and other Hamas-affiliated groups in the West Bank. That's all I got for now. Of course, if you're interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, which is like a newsletter website mix. It's called Between the Lines. It's linked in the description below. Covers a wide range of this stuff. Most recent one was about the Israeli Houthi attacks back and forth, right? The Houthis attacked Israel and Tel Aviv, and then Israel carried out a pretty significant airstrike against a port in Yemen. Wrote about that, always covering things like China, lots in the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, and quite a bit more, all in the description if interested. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.